So they could go remotely, tap in, download the video, and actually saw one of these quote-unquote Sasquatch eruptions happen. Welcome to Planet Geo, the podcast where we talk about our amazing planet, how it works, and why it matters to you. What?
What?
Were you in Yellowstone a year ago when this geyser erupted that we're going to talk about today? Or were you guys
The hydrothermal explosion in Biscuit?
Yeah. Yes, that's right. Were you there or were you
No, missed it by about 10 days actually.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. You were there before or after?
Yeah. I was there before it happened, and then when it happened, I think I had just arrived in Iceland.
Oh, interesting. Okay, yeah. So you were in hydrothermal country for about like a month and a half or something right there.
It felt very close to home. Yeah.
I have this image in my head of this hydrothermal explosion going off, and Chris Bullheist scampering down the boardwalk, running towards the hydrothermal explosion while everybody else is running away from it. And Chris is like, "I gotta go see it," and Jenny's like, "No, don't go, Chris!" And you're running towards it, and everybody else is running away. But you know, I
truth be told, I'd like to think that would be me, but I don't know. This really came out of nowhere. You know, I mean, you're just walking down the border. This thing is really close to the parking lot. So, you know, you don't have really a lot of time to get acclimated to what's going on.
No, that's right. That's right.
And all of a sudden this thing goes off.
So what we're talking about is it's the Black Diamond Pool in the Biscuit Basin, the Biscuit Geyser Basin, Yellowstone National Park, which is, I mean, we have a whole audiobook series, our whole visual podcast series on our CampGeo mobile app. First link in your show notes on Yellowstone. We cover all this stuff. We go into gory detail about hydrothermal features. We even have some pictures of a couple of the geysers, the hydrothermal explosions that we'll talk about this episode later on in the chat in that audiobook guide. But what we're talking about here is an eruption that happened on July 23, 2024 that sent mud, rocks, water up to 400 feet or 120 meters into the air, and there's videos on YouTube or online you can find where people are really running away from this. You can kind of see this thing actually happening, and that closed the entire basin, Chris. And so, Chris, what does this basin look like? Can you describe this to us? Like, what was closed? If you showed up in summer 25, what did it look like?
You can't even get into the basin. The whole thing is closed off. It's a small geyser basin anyway. There's a beautiful hot spring there.
Let me interrupt, Chris. What is a geyser basin? For people who have not been to Yellowstone, describe what a geyser, what does it look like when you pull up?
This is textbook when you think of geyser basins in Yellowstone National Park, where you look around, all of the hills around you are lava flows. There's rhyolitic lava flows, tons of obsidian around there because that's how obsidian forms these really sticky, viscous lava flows. And Biscuit is like nestled where these lava flows never quite came together.
Okay, so
they
you
never
are really
together.
a physical basin, hills around you, and there's a boardwalk going through probably that's been made, you know, maybe several kind of loops that go through, and you look at different geysers, etc., hot springs, mud pots, etc.
Yes, I think the big draw, there's a beautiful hot spring called Sapphire Pool.
Okay.
Aptly named. I mean, it's gorgeous. Yeah, that's kind of the stage of what we're looking at. But when you leave the parking lot, which is a small parking lot, it's not a big basin at all. I mean, Jesse, we're talking less than 2 miles away from Old Faithful.
Oh, right. Okay. So yeah, we're in that.
So it seems to be like a stopping point. Like, hey, let's check this out real quick. People don't tend to stay long. I think it's gorgeous though, Jesse, because the Firehole River runs right through. And then you have these pools. You have, you know, this black opal pool, and you have black diamond pool right after you leave the parking lot. Then you walk a little further and you get to Sapphire Pool, and you keep on going down the boardwalk, and you get to these other little sputtering little geysers and hot springs and so on. They're just kind of like spitting constantly. I love this area though, because there's a trail where the boardwalk ends, but it's an established trail that takes you out to just some absolutely shockingly beautiful waterfalls, Mystic Falls.
Okay. Oh, exceptional.
Yes.
Okay. I remember.
I took you there.
Yeah. I remember this from going back a while now. But okay, so that's kind of what we're thinking. It's one of the smaller geyser basins, as you said, but the whole thing's closed down summer 2025 because this was what the geologists and the people monitoring these things in Yellowstone National Park termed Sasquatch eruptions, which were multiple eruptions on showing up on their monitoring screens that they never really saw. So you got hints that they happened, that we know they happened, but never really saw what was actually going on. Thermal pulses in the temperature probes, etc. And so this was going on.
Wet. Let's talk about those a second, because I think they're fascinating. You had wet ground. You'd have freshly sprayed rocks from these eruptions where it just kind of heaves them up in the air and they land a short distance away. Like you said, too, they had thermal probes, and it would record these like spikes in temperature with a sudden drop in temperature then within a matter of like just a few minutes. And so they never caught them, right? And so it's so perfectly named.
I like that. I love that name.
Sasquatch Eruptions.
I mean, Sasquatch, like hints of it through the woods, but you never actually put your finger on it. You know, don't actually know if it was that. And there's a really cool story of the actual, discovery or documentation or visual identification of these eruptions actually happening, and a kind of a cool scientific story that we're going to get into here. But Chris, so what happened with your students? You take 26 now, 28 high school students out west every year. 26, okay, out west every year, and you go to Yellowstone. You spend, I don't know, 5-6 days in Yellowstone, I think. And what did you do? Did this affect your travel plans at all, or what you taught students?
It absolutely did. I was a little upset because I was talking to one of my ranger friends there.
Well, you're
I'm
always
like,
upset when your routine gets a little like, when your routine is disturbed. Chris is upset.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't know if that's fair, but anyway, I was like, I want to get back and I want to see Biscuit. I want to see what happened. I want to get back to Mystic Falls.
Totally.
And I'm like, why do they still have it closed off? Because I didn't really have an idea as to how active it had been since July 23 of 24. Like, I didn't know that it was these Sasquatch eruptions were going off. So obviously they don't know what's going on with Black Pool Diamond or Black Diamond Pool. I mean, they're just safety reasons. Nobody's allowed back there. Had to close down. I didn't know that. I don't know if it was like really well published or I just never came across it, but that's definitely super active.
It's a really good point. I mean, in a place like Yellowstone, if you don't have a pretty good idea of what's happening, you don't want people walking around because these things collapse. There's all sorts of, we'll talk about this briefly, that this ground is unstable in many of these areas, and there's horrific stories in all of these hydrothermal areas across the world, and especially in Yellowstone, just because of the high concentration of hydrothermal features. So you really got to be really careful, exceptionally careful, until you understand exactly kind of what's going on here. So Chris, this was to kind of set the story here. That happened late July last year, 2024, summer 2024, closed everything down. And then in early May, when they could presumably get back into here and actually do some of this kind of field work, started putting up remote monitoring things, and actually a webcam installed next to this Black Diamond Pool, the one that erupted in July 2024. And this has a long history of eruptions, this pool, and we'll talk a little bit about that, sort of how these things ebb and flow. But like you said, there was rock debris occurring, wet spots in the ground. Came up with a great name, Sasquatch Eruptions, because we can't really put our finger on it, don't know what's happening, but there's clearly activity going on. And then on May 31, several people, including a citizen scientist. So I really appreciated this, Chris, because the citizen scientist thing is, I mean, what's that term mean to you, citizen scientist? It's a hot term in scientific communities, and I'm sure you come across it all the time.
I do. I come across it more in the astronomical field.
I was just going to say that. I agree. I totally agree with you. And I think astronomy is a scientific discipline that's really perfect for citizen science activities, because it's like they're just flipping through images, looking for changes a bunch. Like that's something a lot of people, especially there's a lot of astronomy interested nerds out there. Frankly, I'm a nerd, so I can say that. But there's a lot of people interested in this and are willing to kind of go through that. And there's like exoplanets that have been discovered by citizen scientists. And I don't know, the term could feel derogatory in some way, but it's just like not traditionally
I don't think
trained
so at all.
scientists. Like the citizen scientist just means like people who are not traditionally trained are doing the work or participating in the work at least.
but their contributions have been amazing, I'm
unbelievable,
way more familiar in the astronomical field. But I think it's a great term, actually.
I think it's I
have a lot of respect.
I have a great appreciation for it. So there's a citizen scientist who helped observe, kind of say, oh wait, there's new rocks that have been displaced tonight, and actually it happened in the last such and such hours, so that the scientists could go and actually remotely download the video, because these things kind of overwrite themselves, trying to save storage space. So they could go remotely tap in, download the video, and actually saw one of these quote unquote Sasquatch eruptions happen.
Yeah. And that's an interesting thing, Jesse, is, they can't just live stream the camera that they've put up, the webcam, because the Wi-Fi in Yellowstone is just, it's notorious.
Abysmal.
It's just not good.
We've experienced that firsthand many, many times. Yeah,
that's right.
Totally abysmal.
That's right. So they don't have the ability to just live stream this thing, but it is recording video. So when they get these kind of, since May 14, when they installed this webcam, when they get this Sasquatch kind of activity where sensors are picking it up, temperature probes are picking it up, seismometers are picking it up, they can remotely download some of the video for that time period, and that's what they did. And I'll tell you, if you haven't already seen it, it's really cool to
Very
see.
Cool.
It's this
very
May 31 eruption, just seemingly out of nowhere. There was no warning. There was no, nothing going on, and then all of a sudden it just explodes.
And
Chris, really cool.
I think the data charts are interesting to look at too. These sort of temperature probes that are measuring the outflow from this black diamond pool. So there's a temperature probe sitting in there, and it's constantly measuring temperature. You look at these charts, and over a 24-hour period, one day, May 31, basically it's flat for a long time, right around 120 degrees, 130 degrees, slowly kind of creeps up a little bit by about 9 a.m. Then it kind of starts to oscillate a bit high, going up and down between 130, 110 degrees, something like that. And then a big spike at 8 p.m. Big spike up to about 146, 150 degrees Fahrenheit, that is, and then drops way back down to like 80. And then kind of climbs back up. So over the course of 2 hours, it did this big spike, really quick spike over 4 minutes, then big drop down, and then recovered back to about 125 or something, which was kind of baseline. And that's the kind of signature of this hydrothermal explosion. Like I find that really cool. This flatline, pulse hot, pulse cold, and then flat, and then sort of back to baseline slowly. It's a really clear signature. It's almost like an earthquake seismogram, where you get a big pulse and then some activity afterwards, right? You kind of have foreshocks, aftershocks, that kind of thing. And we're seeing it in the temperature profile of the water flowing out of this thing. It's really an interesting way to monitor these hydrothermal systems, I think.
Yeah, I think too, Jesse, the takeaway is that there's no indication at all that these explosions, because hydrothermal explosions are not an uncommon thing in Yellowstone.
Oh, yeah.
We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. They're not triggered by magmatic processes or magmatic gases interacting with shallower water. This is just simply hot groundwater. Pressure is building due to steam and gas below the surface. When the pressure exceeds the strength of the rock or something shifts, it could be a minor earthquake causing a change in pressure, and you get these no precursor explosions from these hydrothermal pools.
A Sasquatch explosion.
Actually, Jesse, yeah.
So
or, it'll create a new pool, and that's an interesting thing.
I think so. On that note, Chris, I just want to touch on that real quick and then pass it back to you to tell the story of this thing, because I think this is not a well-appreciated feature, and we have a whole chapter really dedicated to this in our Yellowstone audiobook series. The ephemeral nature of these features, these hydrothermal features, they are changing all the time. We think of them, we like to think of them as very regular. I think Old Faithful has kind of painted maybe a false template in everybody's mind for what these things should be like. They're really irregular, and they blow themselves apart, and they form themselves, and they're changing constantly over kind of the multi-year, decade timescale. So on this particular one, I don't know the history of this black diamond pool. You'd mentioned something offline about the history of this. What is the story here of this pool that blew itself apart recently? Yeah,
we know that it came into existence due to an explosion, or likely an explosion that created this pool, because that's usually how it starts. that it happened somewhere between 1902 and 1912.
Oh, really?
And
that old?
the reason we know
cool.
this,
Very cool. Yeah.
Yep. Well, see, I look at that and say, oh, wow, that's not very old at all. But I don't know, just different perspectives maybe, but
yeah, fair enough. But you're ancient, so that makes sense to me.
That's true. I was around. I was just a young boy at that time.
You were teaching high schoolers at that point.
But there were some early photographs, and then scientists were in the area, and they made no mention of Black Diamond Pool. There was actually nothing between where the parking lot is right now or the Firehole River. There's nothing between the Firehole River and Sapphire Pool. And then in that time frame, there's a picture from 1912 where all of a sudden Black Diamond Pool is there. And it's really kind of straddled between the Firehole and Sapphire Pool. So that's how it came to be bracketed in that time frame, just based upon the evidence.
So it's old photos documenting kind of at some point in time a Sasquatch eruption maybe actually created this pool, and then it's existed for a while, and then it is the interpretation then that this most recent eruption, this 2024 eruption, it coughed and it cleared the throat, and then now it's changed the plumbing system in some way, shape, or form. So if you go back and it's open next year, will it look very different than it did in 2023 to you and your students?
Yeah, I think, when you're in Yellowstone, you know kind of what to look for these hydrothermal explosions, Marie Bay, Indian Pond. These are not uncommon events. Pork Chop Geyser in Norris Geyser Basin that we'll talk about in just a second. You can see the debris that they've coughed out, and that debris doesn't go away in that amount of time. You can see the rocks that were thrown about, and you're like, oh, that makes sense. Those rocks were ejected from that area right there. Like that pool threw those out. They just they're violently big. Coughed them out.
These are big rocks. Like there's a reason you run away from these and you don't do a Chris Ballheis running towards these things, because they're big. I mean, these are even this event that was captured, the one of the Sasquatch eruptions that was captured. It's fairly violent. I mean, you think hydrothermal, it really is an explosion eruption. It is a hydrothermal. It's more than a burp, right? You kind of see waves going across the pool and throwing this hot water around. It's more violent than I expected for, kind of a throat clearing exercise from a small pool, basically.
Yeah, and there's really it's interesting too, because typically with some geysers, you'll see some gurgling happen, and then it will kind of pick up steam and build. There was none of that. It just fa-whoomp, and it was gone.
It's amazing. Yeah, that's a really good point. That I'm used to, all the times I was in Yellowstone as a kid, and then with you, and more recently again with you in 2019, I think it was. That's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that. You often see the prelude to the geyser eruption is that gurgling, that bubbling. Like there's stuff happening before, and sometimes it happens and then it doesn't actually erupt, and it was just a false cue. But it rarely goes from flat calm to explosion, and that's kind of what this does in a sense. Yeah, very cool.
So I would like to talk about geologically. There's a compelling piece of evidence that says this had nothing to do with magmatic processes. This was shallow, it was steam. And that is, when you look at the kinds of rocks that were ejected, these were shallow rocks. There was no bedrock was coughed out of this. This was all glacial debris. It was siltstone, it was mudstones, and sinter and geyserite from right near the surface that's kind of lines all these pools. There was nothing deeper than that. No rhyolite from deep down was coughed out here. And so that's another, this was not a magmatic thing, because I think everybody can agree that would be a much more concerning thing if we had magmatic related stuff happening.
Definitely. So, and I think that, Chris, that brings up a really good point about these hydrothermal plumbing systems. I think the natural way to think about these is that people often think, oh, okay, the magma is giving off water, or the water's coming into contact with the magma itself, and then it's kind of coming up. And that does occasionally happen. I mean, it happens at a very small scale, but most of the water here, this is groundwater that's circulating down and getting heated up just because there's a hot magma shallow. It's not hitting magma in that way getting hot. It's the magma heats up the rock around it, and the groundwater circulates through that hot rock around it and then up. So there's not necessarily it's very infrequent actually that there's a direct link between surface water and magma plumbing systems. Like they're connected by a big bunch of rock and water in between there that it's not a direct line of plumbing down to the magma chamber. You couldn't like dive down and follow this, vent down and hit the magma chamber. That's not the way this works.
Exactly. And there's also like usually 2 layers of water. You have your fresh groundwater that then is getting heated by the salty brine groundwater below that. So you have this, like, that's a big buffer between
huge buffer.
What happens in the first 100 meters of the surface down to where the magma lies. There's a lot of, a lot of room there.
No, that's right. That's a good buffering layer between these two systems. And so, Chris, I think on the scale of Yellowstone activity, can we maybe move into talking about some of the types of activity that occurs in Yellowstone? Because the sort of press releases we see all the time in the sort of science news stuff is all Yellowstone's going to erupt. Yellowstone's getting more active, et cetera, et cetera. And what they often are alluding to is the big eruptions, which there's been 3 in the last couple million years in the current location where Yellowstone is, and there's been many dozens over the last 17 million years, going back over 7 or 8 different caldera hotspots, one of which is a lithium deposit, actually. But people, when they think of Yellowstone activity, they think of super volcano, huge eruptions, but the vast majority of this really, actually, the stuff we need to worry about as humans is probably the small stuff in a way. Right? I mean, is that accurate to say, or the smaller, more frequent stuff? It's not the big super.
Yeah, I mean, we can put some numbers on this in a vague sense. These small hydrothermal explosions that we're talking about that happened in the Biscuit Geyser Basin, or Port Chop Geyser in 1989, and Norris Geyser Basin, or even Excelsior Geyser, which is right near the extremely beautiful Grand Prismatic Spring, which that didn't happen until the early 1880s. Those are all smaller hydrothermal explosions, and you're going to have many of these per century. So these are not uncommon.
Hey, Chris, what I've forgotten now. I know we went through it when we putting together the Yellowstone audiobook, but the big ones, the big eruptions, the big hydrothermal eruptions that are on the scale of like Mary Bay. Those are
different,
far less frequent. In your mind, are those in a completely different category?
Yeah, those were related, at least the ones that you just listed off, those were most likely formed during the breakup of the ice dams on the northern shore of, where Yellowstone Lake used to be, not where it is now. It used to extend further up into Hayden Valley and Pelican Valley. When those dams broke and the water rushed down the Yellowstone, creating the Yellowstone Grand Canyon, that sudden drop in pressure from the lowering of the water due to the ice dams breaking, those were related to those kinds of hydrothermal explosions.
Okay. Yeah. So just
like Indian Pond. And
I think it's important to kind of keep in mind that hydrothermal explosions, there's hydrothermal explosions, and there's all sorts of different categories. They have different processes. And the really big violent ones, historical ones not historical, ones that are glacial times. Those are totally different process than these relatively small kind of throat clearing plumbing system. I kind of think of this as these ones we're talking about, the ones that you said, there's several to many per century. I kind of think of these as like your plumbing system in your house needs kind of clearing out every once in a while. You call Roto-Rooter or something like that, or trees come in and dig, get into your system going out to the road, and you got to clear that out. It's that kind of stuff that you got to do a couple of years or whatever, just kind of upkeep. Whereas the big resetting events are a very different scale and a very different process.
Right. So, what other things happen in Yellowstone, or that Yellowstone's known for? I mean, you can have strong earthquakes. Those, we said hydrothermal explosions, many per century. Strong earthquakes, we're talking about maybe 1 to a few or many during a century. And then let's get into the magmatic stuff. So lava flows, they were talking about the non-violent rhyolitic lava flows. It's just really sticky stuff oozing to the surface.
Well, Chris,
these are far more common.
Non-violent compared to the big eruptions, but these are more violent than earthquakes, more violent than the hydrothermal explosions. Like for human scale, these are still volcanic eruptions, but they're not like...
It'd be a very big deal.
Yeah. Oh, it'd be a huge deal, but it's not, planet altering deal.
But they are far more common than these big caldera-forming eruptions. These, you're going to, on average, maybe 100 per million years. And then, of course, you got the big dogs, these caldera-forming eruptions that can change the game, change the climate, affect really everything. Like you said earlier, maybe 1 or 2 per 1 million years. I think that just puts things in perspective a little bit. These are really rare kinds of things with the caldera-forming eruptions. Hydrothermal explosions for Yellowstone, they're just not.
No, that's right. If you're trying to find something to worry about going to Yellowstone, you don't need to worry about the caldera-forming eruptions. You'd much rather you'd be much more better use your time worrying about a hydrothermal explosion as you're walking along the boardwalk, which is still an incredibly rare event, right? Like it's not going to happen, but that's something that's more likely, if that's the correct word here.
100%. And then, but this leads, Jesse, nicely into something that, when we first started kicking this around, hey, let's talk about this because there's some interesting geology with it. Then I started coming across my social media feeds, all these things
Chris's
about
social media feed. Get ready, people. We're getting a window into Chris's social media feed here.
Just a lot of stuff
Chris,
about.
Tell me what kind of tractor repair stuff is coming across your social media feed right now.
Oh. You have no idea, by the way, Jesse. I spent the weekend. I thought I was going to get all the stuff done. My truck broke down. My lawnmower broke down. And so none of the other stuff I wanted to have happened. I just ended up fixing stuff. Frustrated. And Jenny broke them all. So,
oh, gosh, Jenny, just get it together.
I know.
You need a guy to follow her around fixing stuff after she's gone around using it, don't you?
All right. What was I going to say now? I didn't even remember.
I'm not entirely
you threw
sure,
me
Chris,
completely
but
off
your
track.
little pea-brain lost track of what you're trying to say.
Yeah, what was coming across my social media feed? Well, all of the animals are fleeing Yellowstone. This started somewhere in July, and it just kept coming and coming. I came across it when I was on the trip with my students.
The animals started fleeing in July, or your social media feed, you started seeing news things about or something about animals fleeing?
I think both. And there was an article about this. This really made me scratch my head. There was a post about how hundreds of mountain lions are fleeing Yellowstone National Park. And I'm like, wait a minute. There are probably not hundreds of mountain lions that exist in Yellowstone.
Okay,
so I had to go look into that. And indeed, there's maybe they think there's about 40 of them maybe in the greater Yellowstone area.
So it's impossible for hundreds to be fleeing. Yeah, okay.
That's right. But Jesse, these things happen, I think, almost every time there is an event at Yellowstone. With the Black Diamond Pool explodes, and then there was the other headline too this summer. That did you come across this? That there was a new pool that opened up in Norris Geyser Basin. Did you see that?
I did not see that. No.
Okay, yeah, it's a small pool. I think it's this is testing my memory a little bit, but I think it's 10 feet across. It's really this kind of milky white or milky blue color, really pretty. But you know what the headline was? New pool just suddenly shows up in Norris and shocks the scientists. Shocks. This is unlikely
any scientist is shocked by this, actually.
No.
Okay.
No.
So a quick back to the purported status of animals leaving Yellowstone. So Mike Polland, who we had on our podcast, an amazing science communicator, scientist in charge at Yellowstone Volcano Observatory, wrote a little article on his Yellowstone Caldera Chronicles about this. And I'm just going to read you the intro line. The intro is, quote, here we go again. Paragraph. The internet is abuzz with claims that animals are fleeing Yellowstone National Park and suggesting that bears, elk, and other creatures know something about Yellowstone's volcanic system that humans don't. Hogwash. End quote. I thought that was great.
I love Mike Polland.
I love it. That's just too good. Here we go again. Hogwash. That was great. I thought that was excellent.
know, Jesse,
and then Chris, one more thing on
remember
this. One more thing on this article. They've got a photo of a couple bison. The caption is, "These bison seem pretty relaxed." There's a picture of a grizzly bear. The caption is, "Hey mom, have you seen any volcanoes around here?"
It's dripping with sarcasm.
Oh, it's totally tongue in
good.
cheek, and exemplifies his lack of respect for these quote unquote news articles, fear mongering about Yellowstone. I think. Anyway, sorry,
it's ridiculous.
I keep interrupting you.
No, that's okay. I was gonna say I remember back in 2003. Norris Geyser Basin. We talked about this in our audio podcast series too, about these like weird things that were happening there. And that did the same thing. What was going on in Norris combined with a couple other things, like we found some new hydrothermal features in the bottom of Yellowstone Lake. And scientist gives an interview about these changes, and all of a sudden the BBC gets a hold of it, and we're going to make a movie about Yellowstone super eruption, a true story. It just hasn't happened yet. That's how this made for TV movie starts off, you know. It's just it's ridiculous. But these things, they happen again and again and again. It's whenever Yellowstone just does what it does.
I know, it's just like a perpetual motion machine. I mean, Yellowstone, I think there's some aspect of it. I have to be a little bit, glass half full here. I think there's some aspect of it that's encouraging, that the geology of Yellowstone has such traction with the sort of, it's a little clickbaity, but it shows that it's fundamentally interesting to people. I don't think it's all just people like catastrophe. I think it's actually because it's interesting. It's such a cool, unique place that stories about it gain traction. And yeah, they get spun up a little bit frequently, and it's very frustrating. I can't imagine being Mike Boland or any of the scientists at the USGS or any of the Yellowstone scientists working there, because you just have to deal with this all the time. But I think it's a good sign. I think people are interested in Yellowstone. It's a really unique.
I agree. I have
place.
A different take.
Okay, well, different take.
I do. I appreciate your take on it. It maybe tempers me a little bit, but when I think
really
about
my
what
job
you just said,
is just to temper you. That's all I do, is just temper you.
You need to do better.
It's true. It's true.
My job, I think more than yours, because I get younger students, but the goal really is to, all right, let's just be a little bit more critical about this, or let's maybe take the time to let's push pause. Let's take the time to look something up.
Let's look at our source. Where are we getting this information from? If something sounds like BS, then your BS meter should be going off.
Maybe I need to look into this a little bit more.
That's right.
Instead of just reposting or sharing or commenting on something, let's just push pause and let's calm down and let's look. I don't know. We have the world at our fingertips these days, and we tend to be a little lazy in using that advantage. I don't know.
The world's not always ending. It's gonna be okay here. And you know what? If Yellowstone decides to erupt, there's nothing we can do about it anyway. So
go there and watch.
Go there and watch. That's right. Go there and watch the thing go off. I think, Chris, this is a really good example of the underappreciated aspect of Yellowstone and Yellowstone geology. And when you're at Yellowstone, when you're walking around, appreciating the beauty, the unbelievable beauty of these hydrothermal features, it's underappreciated how ephemeral these are. And this is just a really good case study in describing that and showcasing that, how much these things change, how frequently they change, and that these types of throat clearing, resetting events are really common. New pools open up, new basins open up, they kind of ebb and flow and then eventually die, and they turn into different features. That's very natural. That's part of the process. That's part of the beauty of the system, really. Old Faithful is the rare one. Old Faithful is not the type location for what a geyser looks like. That is a really rare system there, due to the regularity, or the regularity is incredibly rare.
It's shocking that it's still that way with all of the other seismic activity that surrounds the area. A shift can just at the snap of a finger just shut that off and change everything and divert water away from it's amazing that it's still
amazing
going
it's
the way that it
still
is.
doing its thing. Yeah, no, I think we can appreciate the really regular ones even more, because most of them are very irregular and change a lot, and that's part of the great stuff. You can go to Yellowstone many times in your life and see very different features in the same locations. So I think that's a great part. All right, well, Chris, Sasquatch Eruptions. It's a good name. It's a good name, app description. I love that. That's very cool. A little bit of citizen science goes a long way here. That's awesome. Love that stuff.
Absolutely.
All right,
you got it.
That's a wrap. You can find all of our content, including Yellowstone National Park's visual podcast series, on our CampGeo mobile app. First link in your show notes. You can follow us on all the social medias. We've got some listener questions episodes coming up or scheduled, so hit us up on the social medias if you have questions you want us to answer. You can also send us an email. We have a contact us link on our website, planetgeocast.com.
Cheers.
Peace.